Hello, this is Mr. Froelich. Today's screencast will be going through the formation of weather fronts and their effect on our daily weather. Now, in order to fully understand how weather fronts are formed and interact with the daily weather, we need to remember some of the basic things that we've been learning the last couple of weeks. Now, remember that pressure centers are areas of wind that are rotating due to the Coriolis effect. We know that these are areas of wind that circulate air from different regions. Anywhere in the northern hemisphere where you have winds that are moving counterclockwise, you will have a low pressure center. Anywhere on the northern hemisphere where you have winds going clockwise, you will have a high pressure center. Each of those we've associated with basic weather patterns. For example, a low pressure center is usually associated with cloudy and windy weather, and a high pressure center is usually clear and calm. These pressure centers are then driven around the planet by the jet stream, which is a fast river of moving air. Pressure centers that are caught in the jet stream will move similar to a boat in a river and follow the current. If a pressure center is not in the jet stream, it is in what we call a holding pattern and will stay relatively stationary. We've also discussed how clouds are formed, and we know that they are formed only when water in the air is rising and condenses as it cools. We've also talked about how when these clouds become energetic enough, those cloud droplets will combine together and create raindrops, which are too heavy to stay in the air and fall from the sky. Lastly, we also have discussed how to read a basic station model, which tells you a bunch of weather data in a very quick and convenient visual manner. As a quick review, this example has a temperature of 26, has a dew point of 16, the pressure would be 999.7, I would have a westerly wind at 20 knots or miles per hour. So, the first thing that we need to understand with the formation of weather fronts is that across the planet there are several different types of blobs of air called an air mass. These will share similar qualities across the entire bubble, like similar temperature, dew point, wind direction and speed, and other factors like that. Now, weather happens mostly when you are starting to mix these air blobs or air masses together. A pressure center is a very efficient way of circulating the air from one air mass to another. In this case, I would be bringing tropical air to the north, and I would be bringing polar air to the south. So I'm changing the temperature and dew points over different areas. Another way to show this is to instead draw something like this, which you maybe have seen on different weather forecasts. This is called a cold front, and it represents the leading edge of that continental polar air moving south. This line represents the tropical air moving to the north, and it shows that these air masses are moving. One way to help visualize this is to watch this animation and see how those fronts will circulate around a low pressure center over the course of a couple of days. Now, as you watch this, I want you to pay attention to the motion of the cold front, the warm front, and also the way that those cold and warm fronts will scoot across the ground in the animations above. You'll notice that as those fronts move across the ground, you have arrows that represent air that is rising. Now, it's no secret that air rising is what is needed for clouds, since we've covered that already in this unit. One thing to notice is that at a cold front, the clouds can grow very, very tall, where the clouds over a warm front generally stay thinner. Both can produce precipitation. Now, another way to help us visualize this is to look at this animation, which is satellite image over the course of about 12 hours. You're going to notice right away that there is an area of circulation, and since this is circulating counterclockwise, it is a low pressure center. Now, the other thing that we can do, based on the clouds and the winds, is draw in where our fronts would be. Now I have my cold front that extends basically parallel to that sort of curved line of clouds, and I have winds that are coming from the north or northwest behind it. Where my warm front is, I have winds all moving from the south, and you can see that with the motion of the clouds. Now this is supposed to show us sort of where these air masses are and where they're going. Again, this is a really good way to show the visualization of that low pressure center circulating those air masses, warm and cold, around each other, creating changes in the weather. The basics of a cold front include bringing in drier, colder air. So everything behind the blue line will be colder, drier, generally with winds from the north or northwest. These winds are what is pushing that front forward. The little triangles on the blue line represent the direction that that front is going. In this case, the yellow arrows represent the unchanged wind direction before the front gets there. At a cold front, I'm going to see cumulus or cumulostratus clouds right along the front. So I will notice that when that front is moving across the land, like we saw in the previous animation, my fronts are created at the boundary. This means that any precipitation that would occur would also happen along the boundary. So it would happen where the front meets the ground. Remember, a cold front is going to bring in colder air. You can also have severe weather that comes from cold fronts in the form of a line of thunderstorms. On the other hand, a warm front is going to bring in warmer, more humid air. It's also going to bring in a change in wind direction, usually to the south. So again, the yellow arrows represent the unchanged winds before the front gets there. All of the red arrows show that the southerly winds are pushing that red warm front to the north. A warm front will contain cirrus clouds transitioning to thicker stratus clouds as you get closer to the frontal boundary. This is shown here and means that any precipitation formed at a warm front will usually occur ahead of the front. A cold front has it at the boundary, where a warm front has it ahead of the boundary, which is shown here. There are two less common front types that we need to talk about. The first one is an occluded front. The second is a stationary front. With an occluded front, it is a special case where the cold front and the warm front run into each other. This creates a best case scenario for lift and usually will have severe or large amounts of precipitation possible. With a stationary front, that is marking the boundary between two air masses. In this case, there is nothing that is circulating these air masses, and neither one has enough force to move the other out of the way. With a stationary front, you can still have precipitation, and if you do, it will persist since that front is not moving. Now, to help us understand fronts a little bit further, we will also learn how to plot them on a weather map. This is a very stepwise procedure that once you get the hang of it, it ends up being pretty simple. The first thing you need to do every single time when you are plotting a weather front is to find the low. The low pressure center is again the thing that is creating the circulation of air masses and will always mark the start of where you're drawing your front. Now remember, when you are trying to plot a low pressure center, find areas where the winds are going counterclockwise, find areas where the isobars become a circle or a ring, and then look at the millibar numbers or the pressure reading to figure out if it's a high or low. Once you've done this, a trick to help you figure out where your fronts will be is to find where isobars become pointy. So I've highlighted in an area here where those isobars become pointy. It's a trick that will allow you to figure out a general location of where that front will be. After you've found this general area, look for changes in the temperature and dew point and wind direction on either side of where you think your front should be drawn. A significant change would be 10 or more degrees changing in the temperature or dew point. And lastly, you can look for cloud cover. In this case, this map has a radar overlay which shows areas of clouds and precipitation. One thing to note is that on this map, anywhere in the country that has rain or clouds is somewhere nearby either the low pressure center or the warm and cold front. This again shows why these are so important to understand when we are talking about the weather and forecasting it for the future. Now lastly, let's take a look at a map that probably will be similar to the ones you see on the front's assignment. The step-by-step instructions are still going to be the same. The only difference is you're looking at a real map with different types of data. What you're looking at here has station models and isobars drawn. So now I can get all of that information in one map. The first step will always be to plot your low pressure center. Now remember, when you're doing this, look for enclosed isobars or areas where that black line becomes a ring or a circle. You're also looking for counterclockwise flow of the wind. So what I've done here is I've overlaid the wind arrows to help show that. When you accentuate it, you can see that that wind is certainly going counterclockwise with a center right here. So now I have my low pressure center plotted. Remember, this is going to be the starting spot for drawing my warm and cold fronts. The next thing I'm going to do is look for changes in my wind direction, and I'm also going to look for points in the isobars. So I've drawn the isobar points here, and coincidentally, they're in the same spot where my winds are drastically changing. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for changes in my temperature and dew point. So I have a 45-degree temperature here, according to that station model in Nebraska, and I have a 56-degree temperature according to this station. So there's a drastic change in temperature there, so I know somewhere in between those 2 points, my cold front has to be drawn. I have a 36-degree temperature here in South Dakota and a 55-degree temperature in Iowa. Again, that shows that my cold front is going to be placed somewhere in between there. I'm also going to do the same thing when I plot my warm front. So I'm going to look over to the right side. I have a 23-degree temperature here and a 43-degree temperature here, and I know that my warm front will be somewhere in between there. Lastly, I have a 32-degree temperature in Wisconsin and a 46-degree temperature down below, so again, a drastic change or increase in the temperature. Once you have done this, double check your changes in wind direction, and then after that, you can confidently plot your cold front. Now remember, when you put the triangles on there, that's telling you that that front is moving in that direction. So in this case, it's moving to the right side of the page. I'll plot my warm front here, and again, my half circles tell me that this particular warm front is moving upwards on the page or to the north. Now notice that that cold front and warm front are drawn to separate the different colored circles we drew around those station models, because that represents that area of colder, dry air and that area of warmer, humid air. One important thing to remember is that the boundaries between these air masses is going to lead to changes in the weather. So the first one I've highlighted in green here is where the cold front is, and that is where my warm, humid air is transitioning to cold, dry air, and that has a very good chance of creating thunderstorms, tornadoes, and other severe weather. The other one that I've drawn in yellow is ahead of the warm front, which shows the location of areas where you will have maybe a several hour long thunderstorm or rainstorm. Overall, these are the steps that are used to plot warm and cold fronts and how they affect the weather that we see on a day-to-day basis. It's important that we take all of the things we've been discussing the last week and a half and we put them together to forecast the current and future weather. If you have questions on any of this material, please let me know and I will do my best to help you. Thank you for watching the screencast.